have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
Thanks for downloading, listening, and sharing. My name is Frank Salvato, and you're spending a few moments in Underground USA. If you listen to or read Underground USA regularly, you know that I term contemporary election contests at every level as overglorified junior high school popularity contests. Why else would anyone give a shit about who Taylor Swift or George Clooney or any professional athlete or musician supports? Our society is so incredibly devoid of critical thinking skills that the installed narcissism so prevalent in the mainstream today and fostered and nurtured by the elitist pocketed mainstream media leads most of the voting population by the nose to the belief that it's all about personality and whether or not you are getting behind who the cool crowd is supporting. This is the shocking reality with which we are faced. Our freedoms, our liberties and rights to individualism are now hanging by a thread and are so at the mercy of those who view politics and government with an intellectually shallow eye. Most, if not all, of the so-called uninformed voters refuse to take the time to do deep dives into the presidential and congressional candidates. They're lazy, full of excuses. They have abdicated their responsibility to the rest of us and the Constitution to be educated on politics and government. To them, it's all about the bumper sticker tagline. It's all about the slogan. It's all about the Madison Avenue packaging, the marketing. Orange Man bad, joy, forward. It's all manufactured to manipulate and deceive the people who have been conditioned to consume substanceless, intellectual bubblegum for the mind. How else could a presidential candidate like Kamala Harris get on a debate stage, literally not answer one question asked of her, and call the event a victory? How else could a presidential candidate, again, like Kamala Harris, execute an Olympic effort to avoid answering substantive questions that require detailed answers about what she stands for and what her policies are? I have repeatedly said that this election is not a choice between Republican or Democrat. It's not even really a choice between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, and especially the latter, since the Biden-Harris administration is actually being puppet mastered by Obama 2.0. It's a choice between maintaining our freedoms and liberties and protecting our unique American form of government and the continuing advance of neo-Marxism, or as one of my friends puts it, the advance of neo-Bolshevism. A different friend, a friend from college, recently sent me a podcast clip that illustrates the subject at hand. The podcast is called Modern Wisdom, hosted by Chris Williamson, and features Eric Weinstein, managing director for the venture capital firm Theo Capital. Weinstein is also the person who coined the phrase intellectual dark web, referring to academics and social commentators who express concerns over the perceived excesses of left-wing identity politics. In the clip, Weinstein, who admits he is from far-left political stock, expounds on why Kamala Harris constantly repeats the phrase, "what can be, unburdened by what has been." It's not an innocuous statement. In fact, it is an ominous statement.
Can you please try and explain to me what you interpret by what can be unburdened by what has been? What does that mean?
There's a line in Marx. Sometimes you hear certain phrases like a world to win. AOC uses the phrase, "we have a world to win," which comes from the end of the Communist Manifesto, originally written in German. It basically says you have to wipe out what has been to arrive in the new.
And where's it from? What can be unburdened by what has been?
It's not a direct translation, but it occurs in Karl Marx. If you think about what Mao had to do to wipe out Chinese history, what Pol Pot had to do, you're trying to wipe out memory because the memory has all of this burden. Why is it important to go after doctors and lawyers and teachers and professors? Because in some sense, they are going to resist the new order that you're about to impose. You're looking for a blank slate.
So like a tether to the past. If Kamala Harris is as unsophisticated as we think she is, do we really believe that she is quoting from the dark depths of...
Why do you believe she is as unsophisticated as you have just claimed? What did her father do?
Donald J. Harris, the father of Kamala Harris, Jamaican-American economist, professor emeritus at Stanford University, originally from St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica.
What kind of economics?
Known for applying post-Keynesian ideas to development economics. What's post-Keynesian?
I don't know.
Post-Keynesian economics is a school of economic thought with its origins in the general theory of John Maynard Keynes' subsequent development influenced to a large degree by a name I can't pronounce.
I think that there was a lot of Marxist thought. As a man whose family comes from the far left, you recognize certain sorts of commonalities. I'm sure she would see them in me. The Democratic Party is not communist. I don't think that that's right. That's the critique of many of my right-wing friends. But it is welcomed in a lot of neo-Marxian thought. I would say AOC is straight up Marxist. I don't know. I think Kamala is everywhere between crony finance and Marxism. You're talking about things for which you do not have language.
So the reason that I said I don't think that Kamala can be as sophisticated as perhaps this obscure reference said, I mean, this is your point about how many levels through it do you go. This is the first one, this is the second one, this is the third one.
Yeah.
But in order to be able to do the Ukraine is a country, it is a small country, Russia is a big country, they are a bigger country, this is bad, time is all around us. In order to be able to do that self-referentially, with agency, knowing what you're doing, the metacognition to be able to do that and play a role, to me seems, that's like 200 IQ stuff to be able to do that.
I don't think so. I think it's 130 IQ stuff. I think you could do it better than you think. We could have a pretend, all right, I'm going to talk to you in a way you haven't heard before. Son, I'm going to school you on a few things. You can stop that silly grin and wipe it right off your face. We can sound like however we want. I could affect some sort of Oxbridge accent, or I could do Cockney. It doesn't matter. You're looking at characters. You're looking at professional wrestling. Do you imagine that the Iron Sheik, who is the Iron Sheik? Who is Triple H? Who is the Undertaker? Do you think he actually works in a mortuary? These are characters. George W. Bush, as a debater in Texas for the governorship, was really, really smart. And suddenly he got real dumb and folksy. Do you imagine he actually says nuclear? He knows it's nuclear. I would learn to say nuclear. I could say nuclear. Yeah, I got to be careful with that nuclear physics. And I can get Democrats to correct me and look like assholes every time. There's an old FDR line, which is nothing in politics happens by accident. Don't get taken in at level 1.
It all sounds good until you peel back the ideological onion layers to expose the rot manifesting on the inside. This rot has been facilitated by the progressive movement, which has now revealed itself as a Marxism-fueled drive to first democratic socialism, then socialism, and then, as an end goal, full-blown communism and the end of the great American experiment. Yes, our federal government has transformed into something quite different from what our framers wanted for us. They despised the idea of a centralized government and centralized planning. They believed in the genius of 50 separate states with 50 separate constitutions affecting 50 separate social laboratories that cultivated government tailored to their people. The federal government was meant to be a compact between the states that filled in the cracks, not one that forced the states to their knees in subservience, and definitely not one of a fascist nature that colluded with global corporations to enslave its citizens. Yet here we are. We have a growing and increasingly oppressive federal government captured by deep state fascists. Think the massive disappointment that is Dick Cheney when you hear that term. In 1964, future President Ronald Reagan gave a prophetic speech that has now become known as his A Time for Choosing speech. In it, he laid out the exact evils our country would face at the hands of Marxists masquerading as progressives and socialist Democrats. I present an edited version here, the complete speech linked above.
I have spent most of my life as a Democrat. I recently have seen fit to follow another course. I believe that the issues confronting us cross party lines. Now, one side in this campaign has been telling us that the issues of this election are the maintenance of peace and prosperity. The line has been used, we've never had it so good. But I have an uncomfortable feeling that this prosperity isn't something on which we can base our hopes for the future. No nation in history has ever survived a tax burden that reached a third of its national income. We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. Not too long ago, two friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who had escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are. I had some place to escape to." And in that sentence, he told us the entire story. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down. Man's old age dream, the ultimate in individual freedom consistent with law and order, or down to the ant-heap of totalitarianism. And regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. They've been a little more explicit in the past, and among themselves, and all of the things I now will quote have appeared in print. These are not Republican accusations. For example, they have voices that say the Cold War will end through our acceptance of a not undemocratic socialism. Another voice says the profit motive has become outmoded. It must be replaced by the incentives of the welfare state. Or our traditional system of individual freedom is incapable of solving the complex problems of the 20th century. Senator Fulbright has said at Stanford University that the Constitution is outmoded. He referred to the President as our moral teacher and our leader, and he says he is hobbled in his task by the restrictions of power imposed on him by this antiquated document. He must be freed so that he can do for us what he knows is best. And Senator Clark of Pennsylvania, another articulate spokesman, defines liberalism as meeting the material needs of the masses through the full power of centralized government. Well, I, for one, resent it when a representative of the people refers to you and me, the free men and women of this country, as the masses. This is a term we haven't applied to ourselves in America. But beyond that, the full power of centralized government, this was the very thing the Founding Fathers sought to minimize. They knew that governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. They also knew, those Founding Fathers, that outside of its legitimate functions, government does nothing as well or as economically as the private sector of the economy. So they're going to solve all the problems of human misery through government and government planning. Any time you and I question the schemes of the do-gooders, we're denounced as being against their humanitarian goals. They say we're always against things, we're never for anything. Well, the trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so. Federal, state, and local, 1 out of 6 of the nation's workforce employed by government. These proliferating bureaus with their thousands of regulations have cost us many of our constitutional safeguards. How many of us realize that today federal agents can invade a man's property without a warrant? They can impose a fine without a formal hearing, let alone a trial by jury, and they can seize and sell his property at auction to enforce the payment of that fine. Back in 1936, Mr. Democrat himself, Al Smith, a great American, came before the American people and charged that the leadership of his party was taking the party of Jefferson, Jackson, and Cleveland down the road under the banners of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. And he walked away from his party and he never returned till the day he died. Because to this day, the leadership of that party has been taking that party, that honorable party, down the road in the image of the Labour Socialist Party of England. Now, it doesn't require expropriation or confiscation of private property or business to impose socialism on a people. What does it mean whether you hold the deed to or the title to your business or property if the government holds the power of life and death over that business or property? And such machinery already exists. The government can find some charge to bring against any concern it chooses to prosecute. Every businessman has his own tale of harassment. Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government. And freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment. Alexander Hamilton said, "A nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one." You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. You and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny.
I urge you to listen to the full speech, and when you do, consume his statistics, translating them into a 2024 context. Each of his points applies absolutely and completely to our situation today. We have certainly arrived at a time for choosing. But we've also arrived at a critical moment in time that should be termed a time for educating and informing. We have approximately 40 days to educate as many uninformed voters as possible that elections are not about electing the best candidate, but making sure the worst candidate is kept away from power. You may not like Donald Trump's personality, but that idea, those emotions, must take a back seat to doing what's right for the country, your neighbors, and, at this juncture, the world. November 5th is not a popularity contest. It is a vote to determine whether we maintain freedom and start back to a place of government of, by, and for the people, or whether we embrace Marxism toward the inevitable moment of oblivion. When we come back, our segment on America's Third Watch, broadcast nationally from our flagship station, WGUL, AM 860 and FM 93.7 in Tampa, Florida.
You're listening to Underground USA.
When a government restricts the free speech of its people, it disrupts freedom and societal function, casting a shadow over the democratic process and the diversity of ideas. Free speech restrictions lead to countries where only certain viewpoints are heard. They stifle opposition and reduce the democratic process to a disingenuous formality. When people fear repercussions for their speech, they self-censor. This doesn't just limit controversial or offensive speech, but also destroys innovation, creativity, and even necessary discourse. Over time, this leads to a homogenization of thought, where only safe or approved ideas are expressed. And suppressing speech doesn't eliminate the underlying issues or beliefs, but drives them underground. Governments that curtail free speech do so to maintain control. When speech is controlled, it's easier for those in power to manipulate narratives, suppress dissent, and maintain their grip on power. That's why, when Kamala Harris says this, we should all be alarmed.
There has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites to understand their power. They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation. And that has to stop.
Any government's fascist restriction of free speech sets off a domino effect where freedom incrementally disappears. It's a foundational right that supports the structure of all other liberties, and its restriction can lead to a society where control overshadows freedom. And that appears to be quite all right with far-left Democrats, the DNC, and the Harris campaign. They're not saying it, but your right to free speech is on the ballot this November. Vote accordingly.
The federal government is becoming more centralized by the day. Opportunistic politicians are centralizing power in Washington, D.C., and incrementally whittling away at our rights. Should the worst-case scenario play out and Kamala Harris and Obama 3.0 assume power on November 5th, we must be prepared with a plan to rein in the Marxism they will unleash through the federal government. Nullification, the case for decentralizing the federal government by Frank Solano, lays out a plan in which the state governments can claw back their sovereignty from the overreach of the federal government, saving us from a second bloody civil war. Arm yourself with the knowledge of this nation-saving option. Get your copy of Nullification, the case for decentralizing the federal government, available on Amazon.com in Kindle form and paperback.
Politics from a perspective you can trust. AM 930, The Answer. Online at theanswersarasota.com.
A lot happening in the Middle East. And certainly, we keep hearing how, this is going to be a much larger conflict that's arising and so forth. But what do you think? Is Israel taking them out ahead of schedule and avoiding a larger conflict, or what do you think?
Well, the conflict is what it is. It's Israel against Iran, and the taking out of the leader of Hezbollah has only created 7 more heads of the Hydra. And I understand that they hit the hierarchy of Hezbollah with the pager attacks and then the walkie-talkie attacks and then some of the missile strikes. But you can't get them all until you eradicate all of them. And I'm sure they understand that. So they've entered into a new phase of this war. As for the mullahs, no one's quaking in their boots because they love death more than we love life. And that's something that Osama bin Laden made sure to say in both of his fatwas to the West and to the United States. Point blank, and that's a quote, "You love life. We love death more than you love life." They believe that they're getting rewarded. That's why these people strap on suicide bomb vests and go in. They're zealots. They fully believe this. So whoever steps into Nasrallah's boots, where we in the West say, okay, well, you just put a target on your head. Mm-hmm. They see it as a potential martyrdom that's an honor.
Wow. Well, I mean, at this point, we'd be happy. I'm sure Israel would be happy to oblige with that. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's no way to end this until this until it's ended. I know that sounds very Kamala Harris-like, but it's the truth. If Israel doesn't end Hezbollah, if Israel doesn't end Hamas, this will keep going year after year after decade, because this is a long-term thing for the Islamofascists. They believe Israel shouldn't exist and that there should be first a regional and then a global caliphate that takes a knee to Islam. It's in the Quran. Mm-hmm. It's in the Hadith. It's in the Shura. All of their books, their religious texts point and command this. And because the Quran is considered by devout Muslims the literal word of God, it's not open to interpretation.
Right.
So this conflict that Israel is in and that the West seems to want to give short shrift to, and that the UN looks on ineptly at, is something that will eventually, and I pray that it's not anytime soon, not with this idiot in the White House, but it is something that is eventually going to lead to first a regional and then a global conflict.
Yeah, it's very, very consequential. Use another Kamala Harrisism.
Yeah,
very serious and important. Yeah,
it's holistic.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Frank, just this time on Friday, we were talking, of course, about all the things that were happening with the hurricane, and certainly the aftermath of that. To me, the first responders are just unbelievable heroes in all of this, as we're watching a lot of the aftermath and the rescues that happened and so forth. And you, as a former firefighter, of course, I know that you can relate to those things.
Well, the first thing that any of them would say is that we're not heroes, we're just doing the job.
Yeah. Well, I hear you.
The heroes are the people who are persevering this and surviving with pure grit. My heart goes out to the people who've been in the path of this, especially the people in North Carolina. The pictures I'm seeing coming out of North Carolina are just devastating. Just devastating. And it's not going to be over anytime soon. A friend of mine who lives in the western part of North Carolina says all the roads around him are washed out, and it'll be a long time before they can actually get back to any kind of normalcy there. So my prayers are with the people who are in this path. To my brothers at the badge, stay low. Be diligent in your pursuits. Help the people like we were trained. It's God's work, but it's God's work. It's just our job. So to those people, this storm is turning out to be a lot worse for people north of Florida and the Big Bend than it was for Florida.
Yeah, and that's really saying a lot, because then it's no longer a question of storm surge per se. It's just the massive flooding that you're looking at that and just thinking, how is there that much water to begin with coming through? But it truly, truly is.
Oh, yeah. This is now a major water event, and it'll go in the history books as such.
Frank, today's a great day on the program, by the way, as we've been telling our listeners throughout the morning. And that is, with Monday's broadcast here today, we're starting off a brand new year of broadcasting here on the show. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank you so much for everything that you've done and being here with us. And it just means the world to me. And I just really wanted to thank you for being a great big part of this whole thing.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk truth and truth to power and truth for information's purposes with you every Monday and Friday. And I hope it goes on for years and years and years to come.
Well, thank you. Me too, Frank. And I know that everybody out there just really appreciates you so very, very much. And so it's a great milestone, and we're going to continue on. We've got an election. We've got all kinds of stuff happening and coming up here as we continue on. But thank you. I appreciate what you're saying as well, Frank. And something that John Kerry said, I think you might just take a little bit of an issue with. And John Kerry was on a panel discussion, and he basically was talking about these places that put out all this disinformation, and democracies, they have so much disinformation. And he says, basically, our First Amendment, he says, quote, stands as a major block to being able to, quote, hammer it out of existence. That is what he thinks would be disinformation. What do you think about that?
Well, John Kerry's an idiot. And he always has been. I mean, he's been this wannabe Kennedy his entire life. If you look at his youth, that's all he really wanted to be. He really is a pathetic public figure, and the fact that we gave him any responsibility as far as the government is concerned is a stunning slap at what we should be as a nation. His constitutional illiteracy about the First Amendment is stunning. especially for someone who has served as Secretary of State. Disinformation is something that's executed by bad actors. The only way to stop disinformation is to expose the bad actor. So if you've got the power of the federal government behind you, you don't try to shut it down, you expose it. That means more free speech, not less free speech. And quite frankly, that dovetails right into the idea of the only way disinformation is defined is by the person who wants to define disinformation. Mm-hmm. Hate speech laws. Who defines what hate speech is? Well, the courts. Well, it has to be litigated, and it's got to go through a process. But we have hate speech. There are hate speech laws. There are hate laws. It's all subjective.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
When it comes to free speech, it's objective. Do you have the freedom to scream fire in a crowded theater? Yeah, you do, but there's consequences for that. You have the freedom to do it, but there are consequences. If there was a fire and you yelled fire, are you saving lives? You can argue that. If you yell fire and there's no fire, then we've got a problem that has to be dealt with legally. But to say that you just can't say it, that's ridiculous. It's subjective. Mm-hmm. So disinformation for who? Kamala Harris would say that when you attack her for having zero substance in an interview on MSNBC or CNN, that's disinformation because her answers were chock full of substance. Whereas anybody with half of a brain who listens to what she has to say realizes that it's nothing but filler fluff that has said nothing. So who gets to define disinformation? Kamala Harris, who's defending nothing, or the people who've picked it apart saying there's no substance or you didn't answer the question?
Exactly. And I would turn around and tell John Kerry, well, what about all the Democrats and the media and people who keep saying Trump's going to be a dictator on day one? There's going to be a bloodbath. He's going to steal our democracy. I mean, John Kerry need look no further than his own colleagues at this point.
Well, he's a threat to democracy. He is the person who came up with Project 2025. It goes on and on and on because the political campaign of the Democrat Party, which now is a 24/7, 365 thing. Obama ushered this in, and now we're stuck with it. There will never not be a campaign going on with the Democrats. They will be flushing propaganda down the tube towards you from beginning to end in memoriam now, because they're in constant campaign mode. And the reason for that is win at all costs. It doesn't matter what you do to maintain power as long as you do maintain power.
Right. No, you got that exactly right. And talking about doing that, I mean, there's a lot of, and I know that a lot of times you're very skeptical, as we all are in so many ways about polling. But do you think that Kamala Harris, that their campaign knows something that's maybe a little different than what the overall narrative is and the polls, quote unquote? I mean, is this why they're acting the way that they are? It just seems like, that maybe they know that they're not quite as popular as they think they are.
Well, they're using the same strategy they used last time when they literally put someone into office who was in cognitive decline already. And they figured if it can work for somebody who is medically challenged, it'll work for someone who's intellectually challenged. Make no mistake, Kamala Harris is not a smart person. She's just not. She knows how to weave a tapestry of nothing to sound important, and that's how she's gotten. That and knee pads is how she's gotten to where she is. But they play the long game, Kyle.
Oh, yeah.
If Kamala Harris doesn't win, okay, in 4 years we'll be back. And we can position and we can throw wrenches into the machine. And we can make sure that the Republican who's elected by the people doesn't get to do anything by using procedures as a minority party in Congress, and nothing moves forward unless it's with the anointment of the far left. Republicans don't play the way the far left does. If we did, we would have shut the government down and made sure that voter ID laws were passed attached as an amendment. But we didn't, because government's got to stay open. You know, we can't actually have monuments shut down. We can't have that.
Right, and then also
in an election year, that would be suicide if Republicans had a messaging apparatus that was worth anything, but they don't. They could have laid this right at the feet of Schumer. All he's got to do is say that only citizens get the vote. They won't do that because they want to win at all costs. That's why you're not getting your Social Security check. That's why veterans aren't getting this. It's not Republicans. We've got a bill that wants to fund it. We just want to make sure that foreign nationals don't vote in our elections. But they can't message that because for some reason they're tongue-tied. Either that or the figurative gun barrel is the back of their head from K Street.
Yeah. And in other words, they're all sitting there saying, can we weather a government shutdown? And how does that affect the perception of Republicans? Because they've got such the majority of the media that would be hammering it every day. These Republicans are responsible for all of this.
In the day of social media and direct contact, there is no good excuse for not taking the tough stand when you need to take the tough stand. You don't need the mainstream media to get the message out anymore. You can do it through social media and going directly to the people. That's why Substack works so well.
Yeah. And that's what John Kerry's actually worried about. Well, so Kamala Harris did say, well, to the interviewer at MSNBC, but we're going to have to raise the corporate tax, as if everything happens in a vacuum and the corporations will just say, we got to pay some more tax, but we're not going to raise our rates or anything, our prices. I mean, doesn't she get that?
Yeah, Ted, two points on that. The question that was posed to her when she gave that answer was, okay, so how are you going to pay for what you want to do if you have a divided Congress? Or if all of Congress is won by the Republicans, the House and the Senate? How do you plan to pay for this? And how are you going to fund your economic plan if you don't have a cooperative Congress? And her answer was simply, well, we just have to. We have to raise taxes. We just have to. Like a fourth grader. We just have to. It must be done. We have to. That's the mark of ignorance. The second mark of ignorance is that she doesn't understand, or she does and doesn't care, and she's pandering, is that when you raise taxes on corporations, they pass that cost on down through their products, period, dot. Anybody who tries to argue that that's not the case is a blithering idiot. It's stunning that they're trying to pass this off on the American people. And if they're not trying to do that intentionally, it's stunning how stupid they are economically. It's if you're going to charge me more to make something, I naturally have to raise my prices.
Yeah, and that works with French fries too. I mean, burgers, whatever it is.
It works with the quote unquote widget. If someone comes to buy a widget, and government's saying that we're going to tax you on what you make on that widget, and we're going to tax everything that goes into making that widget, that all goes up, then I have to raise my prices. And that means it's a tax increase on the end user. So whenever you hear corporate tax, they're not paying their fair share. What they're really saying is you're getting a tax increase because what you want to buy for you and your family is going to be more expensive. And by the way, the sales tax on that becomes a greater amount as well because the price is a greater price. So government gets you coming and going with that one.
Oh, yeah. And Kamala thinks that, by simply saying, but don't worry, if you make under $400,000 a year, your taxes won't go up. But to your point, you're saying exactly what's going to happen to people. Of course, they're going to pay more, quote, tax. It's the same thing. They're just going to pay more for all over the place.
You pay more for the product, which is an ipso facto tax, because the government forced the cost of that product to go up, and you're paying more in sales tax directly. So this false narrative that anybody under 400,000, anybody under 200,000, we're not raising taxes on you. It's a bald-faced lie. And it's one that is almost transparent. You could almost see them laughing as they're saying it. And that really should tick everybody off. I really don't understand what's wrong with the people who are actually supporting Kamala Harris and the neo-Marxists of the far left. They just don't seem to understand that once you elect a Marxist into office, once you open the door to communism, once you let that genie out of the bottle, there's no putting it back in but for a revolution. We have an opportunity to save a republic right here and get us back on the path to being a government of, for, and by the people. And we've still got a solid 30% to think that socialism isn't a bad idea. The takeover of the education system is complete. We have to start there when you're getting back to our road to good. We must purge the schools of education of the people who are saying indoctrination is okay. We can't have that anymore. We have to get back to raw education about critical thinking skills, mathematics, science, and the arts. That's it. Because this idea that we have to teach kids how to feel and we have to evangelize about environmental issues and social issues and transgender issues, all of that's got to be purged because they've irresponsibly hijacked the American education system for a neo-Marxist effort, and it needs to end.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and certainly this idea of education, I think that goes right to the heart of what she's talking about is the opportunity economy. She can also fool people into thinking that the government's going to create an opportunity economy when if we had an education system that actually equipped people to function in the economy, they would make their own opportunities. But, she wants to be, this sort of parent figure, I guess. And here you go. We're bestowing opportunities upon you. It comes from the government,
There is no opportunity economy that the government can afford you. The only opportunity economy that the government creates is to get out of the way. They can't have anything to do with the economy if you want to have an opportunity economy. That's built into the Constitution through the Declaration of Independence. So this idea that the government can create, the only thing government can do to affect an economic solution or a social solution is to control the people, whether it's through corporations or the individual. And the more the government takes control of things, the less freedom we have, the less liberty we have. We start to erase individualism when the government gets to control what we all do. Whether it's through your business that you created or how you live your life. Government needs to be diminished, not expanded. And everything coming out of the left today, as far as this election, is about adding another layer of government and more government control, more centralized government into Washington, D.C. I say it needs to be reversed. We need to give more power back to the states, and we need to diminish the federal government, but for their chief and exclusive constitutionally mandated obligations. And that's the military. And what do Democrats want to do to the military? Defund it. Just like their brilliant plan to defund the police.
Right.
Ask anybody living in a blue urban area how that worked out.
Oh, no kidding. But you're right. The idea of Kamala Harris and her ilk is that you have this, everything comes down from Mount Olympus. And if you tangle with them on that, then they want to throw lightning bolts at you.
When you study the thoughts and the writings of Karl Marx, and you look at what Lenin did with Marxism, They want to erase your natural law rights so that government becomes the alpha and the omega and the bestower of rights. That's not what we have in the United States of America. In the United States of America, we understand natural law rights and inalienable rights as bequeathed to us through our Creator, not the government. The government's here to serve us, and right now, we are well down the road to serfdom. And if you haven't read that book by Hayek, read it. Take the time and read it, because we're way down that path. We've abdicated this thing. Our federal government is so far beyond where it's supposed to be. It's stunning. And that's what's on the ballot this November, is whether we keep going down this path to full-blown Marxism or we reverse course and we get back to being a government of, by, and for the people. The choice is clear to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that is also clear is that under a Marxist regime like you're describing, Marxist thought, you're not going to achieve your hopes, dreams, and aspirations that Kamala Harris keeps talking about.
No, but you will be unburdened by what has been, and what has been freedom to this point.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please go on over to undergroundusa.com and subscribe. It brings new podcasts and new articles directly into your email inbox without the circumvention of fact checkers and the censors. That's going to be increasingly important as we get towards November 5th. And remember to talk politics and religion and the critical subjects with your family, friends, acquaintances, and colleagues. That's where we find out that we have more in common than we have in difference. When we understand that, that's when we can neuter the opportunistic politicians who feed off the ignorance of the American people when it comes to understanding that we have more in common than we have in difference. You're listening to Underground USA. My name is Frank Salvato. We'll be right back after this.
Our First Amendment right to free speech is under attack by woke activists and politicians. Wokeism seeks to suppress opinions and ideas that are deemed offensive, insensitive, or problematic, thereby stifling the free exchange of ideas and the pursuit of truth. It emphasizes social justice, identity politics, political correctness, and the regulation of language, and relies on euphemisms and ambiguous language to create the illusion of consensus, thus avoiding confrontation with opposing viewpoints. Wokeism is antithetical to free speech because it stifles the free exchange of ideas and the pursuit of truth. This is in direct opposition to the principles of free speech. Wokeism is an ideological cancer shopped by those who want to control you. This November, we have an opportunity to render wokeness to the ash heap of history. Vote smart. Vote against wokeness and those who would use it to control you.
And, we have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke.